And the remainder, about 3 or 4%, wanted to become an independent country. Well, the Puerto Rican separatists are in two primary groups. The one is called the FALN, which is the weakest of the two, and the other is called the Macheteros. And the Macheteros and FALN have been relatively quiet for some time, but back in the 1950s, back before we had near the security that we do today, some of them got into the Capitol building and they brought in some weapons and shot and wounded a number of representatives. But they're still out there, although they're not nearly as active. Then the next category we have are the right wing. And probably the most notorious of those groups right now are the skinheads. Now the skinheads actually started out in Great Britain, and it was relatively innocuous at first because the skinheads were anti-hippie. And you'll recall the hippies generally were known for having long hair. Well, the skinheads shaved their heads to show they're the opposite of hippies. Well, the skinhead movement came to the United States, and it became increasingly radicalized. And the skinheads are often referred to as the thugs of the right. They're very heavily involved in criminal activity. Then we also have a very well-known group, the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan started in 1866, about a year after the Civil War had ended. And the fellow who really got the Klan going was a Confederate general by name of, anybody help me here? Thank you. Nathan Bedford Forrest. Now, in some parts of the South, he's still considered to be a hero because he was the only senior Confederate general who had never lost a battle. But there's by no means he was a nice guy. Prior to the Civil War, he was a slave trader, and during the Civil War, his men had captured a fort that was manned primarily by black Union troops, and he had all of them massacred. They tried to surrender, but he had them all killed. And when the Civil War was over, there were a lot of people in the North who wanted to have him tried as a war criminal, but turns out that back then the administration under President Johnson was very conciliatory, and he never was prosecuted for war crimes. But at any rate, he became the first leader of the Ku Klux Klan, and he assumed the title of a Grand Wizard. The Klan was partially suppressed by Union troops because they were trying to intimidate, and they largely succeeded, intimidating a lot of the blacks from voting and depriving them of their civil rights. So the Klan was relatively quiet up until 1915. Then in 1915, there was a fellow who made a movie called Birth of a Nation. And it was made by a fellow by the name of D.W. Griffith. And he was considered to be the greatest filmmaker of his time. And he was a great filmmaker, but unfortunately he was also a bigot. And he had read a book called The Klansman, and he loved the book, and he thought this would make a great movie. And you have to realize that back in 1915, people weren't as educated or as sophisticated as they are today. And the movie made blacks look like apes, literally. I mean, made them look in a very, very negative way. And it made the Ku Klux Klan look very heroic. And as a result of that movie, over 5 million people joined the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, it was huge. And there were many places in the United States where you couldn't be elected dog catcher unless you were a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And that was right here, unfortunately, right here in Pennsylvania as well. But then during the late 1920s and 1930s, the Klan engaged in quite a few lynchings of black people, particularly black men, but also even a few black boys. who had committed crimes such as even looking at a white woman for too long. So there was there's a number of lynchings that occurred, and these were well publicized. And as a result of the lynchings, a lot of the American public largely turned against the Klan, and it became a shadow of what it had been back after 1915. Klan was relatively quiet for a long time until the Civil Rights Movement started, and then once that happened, the Klan had a resurgence in the South. And if you've ever seen the movie Mississippi Burning, it's about how the FBI took on the Klan and suppressed them in Mississippi. I'm a bit of a film buff, and if you get a chance to ever see the movie, I'd strongly recommend that. Now, there was another hate group, the National Alliance. National Alliance was founded by a fellow by the name of Dr. William Luther Pierce. He held a PhD in physics and was a professor at Oregon State University. And it's often said that sometimes there's a fine line between genius and insanity, and that was certainly the case with him. He was a brilliant man, but he came up with some extremely prejudiced views. And he wrote a book called The Turner Diaries. And The Turner Diaries is a fictitious account of what he referred to as the Second American Revolution. And in this fictitious book, he basically stated that eventually the whites in America are going to become involved in a race war with minorities, and the federal government will side with the minorities. And in the end of the book, it's about this particular fellow, Turner, who gets in an airplane and flies it into the Pentagon. And after 9/11, after a plane had been flown to the Pentagon, a lot of people in the National Alliance said, well, look, the man was a genius. He predicted something that was going to happen just decades later. Then there's another group called the Aryan Nation, which is a large prison group. Now, during the 1960s, out in the San Quentin prison in California, the blacks formed groups such as the Crips and the Bloods, and they were preying on the white inmates. So the white inmates decided, well, we need to get organized to protect ourselves. And that was when the Aryan Nation was formed. Over time, it has had an estimated 30,000 members. And it has a presence in virtually every major prison throughout the United States. And after people are released from prison, they're encouraged to continue their association with the Aryan Nation. And then the last hate group is called the Christian Identity Movement. Now, this is a really bizarre version of Christianity. In fact, I think most people who would describe themselves as Christians wouldn't want anything at all to do with these people. They go back to Genesis 1, and they said that the true son of Adam and Eve was Abel, and Cain was the result of the mating of Eve with the serpent, the devil. And Cain became the first Jew. So it's extremely anti-Semitic. And then eventually there was another son came along named Seth, and he became the first white person. Again, it's a rather bizarre version of Christianity. There are also, there's another movement called the Patriot movement. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with the Berks County Patriots, but that's the name that they gave themselves. And they have their own interpretation of the Constitution, and they're very much conspiracy-oriented. They believe that there's a conspiracy that's been mounted against, in the United States, mounted against the American people, in which the United Nations is supposed to take over not just the U.S., but every other nation on earth, and create what they call a new world order. That's a favorite catchphrase with the people in the Patriot movement. And they have some other rather bizarre ideas. They believe that the federal government controls the weather, is responsible for earthquakes, for any of a number of different disasters which occur. And it's obviously an anti-government organization. But there's another group that's even more anti-government, and those are called the sovereign citizens. And the sovereign citizens refuse to pay taxes. So as you can imagine, they're constantly in conflict with the Internal Revenue Service. The sovereign citizens have been involved in a number of gun battles with the police, and a number of local and state police officers have been killed by sovereign citizens. The third category are the anarchists. Now, the anarchists are against any kind of organization whatsoever. They're anti-government, they're anti-corporate. Some anarchists are even anti-family. That's how far they take this. Most of the anarchists are young people, and I'm convinced that I don't think they really sincerely believe in anarchy, but I believe that it's primarily a case that they just like to raise hell. And you might recall there was about 10 years ago, there was a World Trade Organization meeting in Seattle. And the anarchists showed up at that, and they caused millions of dollars worth of damage because the police were completely unprepared for them at the time. And then finally, the fourth group are the so-called special interest groups. This includes ALP, the Animal Liberation Front. And these are people who you might have heard about who are against the fur industry. They hate McDonald's because of the amount of meat that they serve. They're also anti-globalization. And the Animal Liberation Front, their primary spokesperson is one of the leading intellects of the 21st century, and that's Pamela Anderson. Now, in connection with the Animal Liberation Front, there's another group called PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Now, PETA is not considered to be a terrorist group, but we know that they sympathize with ALP, and they've provided them with some funds. I have a friend who had attended Penn State, and he said that on campus there was a very active PETA chapter, and he said these people were really obnoxious and loud. So one of the fraternities up there made it their mission in life to harass these PETA people. And one of the things that they did was they made up T-shirts. Now, PETA stands for People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, but they made up T-shirts that said PETA, People Eating Tasting Animals. And then they also made T-shirts that showed a whale, and there was a nuclear explosion over the whale, and it said nuke the whales. So this was just something they did to harass the PETA members. Then we have the Environmental Liberation Fund. They're noted for tree spiking. Everybody likes animals, almost everybody I think, likes animals and likes the environment, but these are people that just take it to an extreme. And with this tree spiking, what they would do is they would go to redwoods and other trees that are being harvested, and at about a 3-foot level, they would drive a metal stake into the trunk of the tree. And it would go in at about a 45-degree angle, and after a while, the bark would cover up the outside of the spike. Well, when lumberjacks would come along with their heavy chainsaws, they would hit this metal spike, which would often break the chain on the chainsaw, and the chain would come flying around, and a number of lumberjacks were killed from bleeding to death as a result, and some lost arms and legs. So that's the Environmental Liberation Front. There's another group called the Sea Shepherds, who are against the whaling industry, and they're noted for making high-speed boats and putting a sharp prow on the front of the boat and running it into whaling ships once they're going out to sea or coming back. There's another group called SHAC, which stands for Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty. The Huntington Corporation provides animals for medical research, and the PETA people and the ALF people really hate the corporation, and they've been noted for harassing and threatening the people who are affiliated with that. And then finally, the last special interest group are the anti-abortion extremists. There's certainly nothing wrong with being either for or against abortion, but these are the extremists. These are people who have actually killed doctors who have performed abortions. They've firebombed places such as Planned Parenthood offices and that sort of thing. And then finally, the fifth, the last category, are the so-called lone wolves. Now, these are often people who are mentally unstable, but not always. One of the most famous would be Timothy McVeigh. He was the fellow who was responsible for the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building out in Oklahoma City. And he was very much involved with the Patriot movement. And he had read Dr. Pierce's book on the Turner Diaries, which gave him detailed instructions on how to make an ampoule bomb. That's an ammonium. I didn't do that. Can you stay for like a minute question? Sure. Yeah. Folks, we're going to open up.
Can you hear? Yes. Okay. We're going to open up for about a 10-minute question and answer period. Please be respectful. Try to keep your questions short, if you would, please. We have this young lady right here. First question. She already asked me.
Okay, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Before we do that, before we take any questions, I just wanted to finish up real quick. I was talking about the lone wolves. There was Timothy McVeigh with the Oklahoma City bombing. There was Ted Kaczynski, the famous Unabomber. Bruce Ivins, who we're about 99.9% sure was behind the anthrax attacks back in the fall of 2001. But he committed suicide before he could be indicted. And then also we've had problems with a couple of lone jihadists as well. But those were the 5 categories, and I just wanted to finish that. So here's the first question.
Well, since something's wrong with Mike. Okay, I'm with that Patriot movement that you were talking about. We are not conspiracy theorists. We believe in the Constitution. The New World Order, okay, did not Bush say New World Order? I call him Junior too. Did not say New World Order. Did not Obama say New World Order? Did not Clinton say New World Order? So I'm a little confused. It's not a conspiracy. So can you answer that?
Okay, the Patriot movement that she's talking about it's big. It's a major movement. Now, the vast majority of the people within the Patriot movement are harmless. They're not a threat to